Hello and welcome. In this video we're going to be looking at simplifying your ideas and your text, or your answers should I say, in a short answers question, but also this is something that you can use for an essay question. Now what we're going to be looking at is how to make your answers less complex and to make them stand out in such a way where the meaning and your detail in your response is very clear, that it's able to be interpreted by whoever's marking it and is able to literally give you a strong answer without having to be sort of mixed and muddled up with a whole heap of complex unnecessary detail. So we're going to be looking at making answers simple, yet making them also quite highly effective, that avoid the common errors and avoid the things which make them convoluted or complex. Now what I mean by those two terms is basically answers that are too complex, take forever to get to the point first of all, or B, don't really get to the point to start with. And so by taking their time, they sort of lose a lot of their effect. And you'll often see very, very good answers told in very complicated sort of ways get marked much lower than ones that are very simple, told using very simple language and written in a very direct and, as I said, meaningful sort of way. So despite what you may think, having the most complex and intellectual answer does not necessarily give you a good response. Your priority should be to take your initial, very detailed ideas and to trim them into very simple concepts and keywords. One thing I always tell students is to start with one word. As in, try and simplify your answer into a one-word thought that you can have at the back of your head. And that will form your keyword, that will be forming the word that you constantly refer to throughout your answer. It's a simple one and it's one that you always go back to, so whenever your answer does start to become a little bit more complex and a little bit sort of moving away from the point, you can bring it back to that straight away without having to do it. And especially in a short answer question, by having a keyword that you repeat a couple of times, it means that your answer never strays, and it means that you can go directly to the ideas that you're trying to put into your answer, especially if you're doing a multiple part question. If you've got a multiple part question and only a couple of lines to write, then what you need to do is you need to have one very clear answer for both sections which both link together. And the only way you can do that is by having a keyword which is consistent. Don't confuse simple with basic. This is a very key piece of advice here. As I said, intelligent answers don't always have to sound like they're intellectual. You don't have to sound like a Harvard professor or even a Sydney Uni professor for that matter for your answers to be good. You don't have to write using overly complex vocabulary. You don't have to write with a lot of specifics and techniques and all these sorts of things. You just have to be specific. So by having a simple answer, one which doesn't overdo it, which simply states all the detail that's necessary, then you're getting something that's more direct, and as I said, you're making your answer a lot more meaningful. And that's not basically to say that intellectualism or even that brains won't help you. Those things will help you a lot, but you should be channeling those efforts into providing a more direct answer. That's basically what I'm saying here. And as I said before, language skills, while important, aren't everything. So even if you're feeling that you're not too confident with your vocabulary, that doesn't really matter too much. As I said, it's about being specific and simple. So you don't have to use the world's greatest array of phrases in order to state an idea, because often what you'll be doing is you'll be sounding clever but meaning nothing. So markers will see through that. They assume they're smart people, and they are smart people, and that they will pick up on when you're writing fluff, basically, stuff which doesn't actually mean anything. So you have to be very careful of that. Alright, simple concepts. Let's look at some simple ways of doing this. You need to first of all rationalize your ideas into a very simple idea which you can launch from. So you don't start with something complex and try and simplify it. You start something simple and then, if necessary, make it a little bit more complex. You need to have that so it's more likely to be understood. So immediately a marker is going to go, okay, I know what you're talking about here. And especially if you're doing an essay, for instance, topic sentences need to be that simple answer. But in short answers, you need to have a very simple answer which you then elaborate with a little bit of depth. It means you'll see less question marks next to your answer. And this is a particularly important one because I like to write question marks, particularly when I don't understand a thing that's going on. And that's usually because of the fact that the answers are way too complex. They don't really get towards anything. They just sort of state a whole heap of things which actually don't show me what the answer is to the question. They just show me lots of different facts and details. You also need to look at it as being the basis of a logical answer, one that can be followed, as in it starts with a simple premise and then goes to a simple conclusion, and of course, more importantly, proven, which means that you're satisfying the criteria. You can use complex details, as I said before, when necessary, but you must make it clear what those complex details prove. And while you don't need to say why complex details are in there, they need to have some sort of purpose. The only reason you would use a complex detail is there's no simple explanation for it. And there are cases where that happens, but wherever possible, you'd be trying to simplify it. Trying to show that, yes, I understand it, and no, I'm not trying to use a heap of language to try and deter people from the fact that I don't really know what I'm talking about. And even if you're one of those people who do know what they're talking about, and hopefully you are, then it means that you are looking at and you're thinking carefully about your answer, and you're thinking carefully about getting your point across, which is ultimately what English is doing. You're trying to communicate. And if you're not communicating very clearly, then you're not getting your ideas across. All right, let's look at this idea of intelligent answers. And as I said before, they don't need to be intellectual to be intelligent. What it means is you can give a very simple interpretation that is well supported, and you don't always have to come up with the most complex argument. You come up with a very simple argument, and then make it so you use a lot of really strong detail in order to support it. English is not something that you can overcomplicate, or it's not something to be overcomplicated, and it's certainly one that can often be overcomplicated. By having one that's difficult to explain, you're wasting a lot of space and a lot of time, and it may not still get across, especially if you're writing in exam room pressure or something along those lines. And especially with a short answer, you need to try and distill it down to a couple of simple ideas and do a little bit of explanation, not too much, trying to keep it nice and simple, as I said. And you also need to be selective of the right interpretations, which shows your intelligence a lot better. And this is the thing, it's about making intelligence work for you. So if you have a very intelligent answer, you need to channel it towards satisfying the outcome, not proving how smart you are. That's the most important bit. All right, next bit. Let's look at simplifying text. Now, simplifying text can involve things such as paraphrasing, for instance, and especially things like long-winded quotes can affect the flow and take up a large section of your answer. But also, when you are, as I said, simplifying a text, the easiest way to actually do that is by paraphrasing it, by stating quite clearly what it is you're getting at, and to also show quite clearly why you've chosen that text. If you use a big quote, what happens is the teacher's going to go, okay, what section of that quote is matching what it is you're trying to say? And so by paraphrasing it, you're picking the part which you're trying to use to supplement your answer. So you're not overdoing it, and you're certainly not, in particularly the case of some quotes, where only a couple of words actually supports the argument and the rest is just filler. You can get rid of all that, it's not needed. You also need to remember that your stimulus only support your discussion, so don't use it as something which is going to be an argument after an argument after an argument based on evidence. As I said, you're not looking for reasons why based on or established by the text. You're looking for reasons that you can prove, that you can discuss and you can talk about in such a way that you can prove the ideas and then use your text to back you up. So you're looking at the other way around. So instead of looking at the text as being the be all and end all, your ideas are the be all and end all. Your text is just a sort of a bit player. Language skills. Okay, as I said before, these need to be simple. You don't need to overcomplicate this. Your priority is, as I said, always making very clear links. Ideas should be referred to as basically something that's concrete. So in other words, you're not speaking in riddles when you're writing your short answers, and particularly long answers, because as I said, they're not really going to get to the point. And certainly if you use things like colloquial expressions and so forth, you can actually simplify those into one-word answers. So by shortening your sentences down and then providing complex details when necessary, and as I said, complex sentences are actually quite essential in essay writing. But the thing is that complex sentences, by many students' descriptions, and certainly this comes across when I mark, is that they go for about 5 lines and they have about 20 commas in them. So if you have a very clear and concrete representation of what it is you're trying to talk about, you shouldn't need to have any more than a couple of lines and for each sentence, and it makes your ideas come across a lot more strongly than if you've got this big long thing that takes forever to get to. And you aren't always suggesting a possible answer, you're proving the correct answer. So that use of language where you're sort of going, okay, I'm suggesting this is true because I'm not sure, does not come across too strongly. So your language needs to be quite clear, as in saying that this is absolutely true, without saying the words absolutely true. You just state the facts as they are. As you are stating things as you see them, you are basically proving it in your own mind. By using evidence, you're proving it. Everything else you're writing is a way to say this is true. And if you have a look at the way that a textbook would write facts, that's exactly the same way that they do it. They don't try and suggest or point towards anything. They state the facts as they are, and then they use evidence to back them up. That's it. They don't need to do anything else to try and prove what the right answers are, because they already know they have the right answers. And when you're writing an answer to a response, you don't need to say, I suggest, I think, I do all this. You just write the answer. You write the facts as they are, you write the evidence that supports it, and that's it. And that's about the simplest way that you can look at approaching it. So the simplest process, and I'll just go through it again very quickly. First of all, break it down into a very simple platform where you have a very clear key idea, a key word, something that you can refer to. The second thing that you need to do is make sure that all the detail you use is absolutely necessary, that you're using ideas which are not overly complex or complicated, and that finally the language you're using is simple, clear, and effective. And that's basically it. So even if you've got a very complex text and the complex thing you have to answer, that's one of the skills that English is trying to test, is how well you can take something very complex and make it very simple, make it very clear. Show that you understand and you know what the right answer is. And on that note, I'll leave it there. So until next time, I'll see you later.